You know, when we were at the Illinois Farm Bureau meeting the other day, visiting with farmers, I had two guys tell me they had been baling, or they were aware of people in their community who had been baling hay in the past week.
In Illinois?
Yes, in the last week of November, baling hay. Can you believe that?
Well, this year I can believe just about anything, Max.
They got off to a quick start. You know, moisture was good in the spring, and then, boy, there was just nothing happening in many of those hay fields in the heat of summer, as you could imagine, and then they were able to get another cutting toward the end. But I've also had guys tell me, if you think you've got hay bought, get there and get it, or somebody's going to buy it out from under you.
Well, they'll outbid you.
Yeah.
Because those prices have just skyrocketed.
Then there was the advisory in Missouri the other day. I don't know if you saw this. They were telling guys to watch your bales out in the field that you might have left out there, still storing out there, because people are going right out and stealing the bales. Yeah, right. Stealing right out of the field. So some guys are starting to put little GPS units, sticking them in the bale. Little cheap units, you know, that they can find and just track that bale later if the guy tries to rip it off.
Isn't technology wonderful?
Yeah.
One of the other stories I've been following is this Eastern Livestock Company that left a lot of people...
based in Louisville, wasn't it?
In Louisville, Kentucky. And now a lawsuit has been filed, and some of the language in that lawsuit paints Fifth Third Bank as a real bad character.
Really?
They say the bank is guilty of cattle rustling because they froze all of the assets because they were the creditor with the company. They froze all of the assets that should have gone to the sellers of the cattle that are now left out there. And when you read the language, it's probably some of the stronger language I've seen in a lawsuit. But I heard from several cattle producers who are not directly involved, but they said this is one of the scary things. Despite the packers and stockyards oversight, this can happen, and they're left.
Packers and stockyards came in for some criticism, a fair amount of criticism on that one for being, well, asleep at the switch, I know some people were saying. And certainly that is a part of their responsibility.
Yep. Last week we talked about keeping the river open, and I guess the Army Corps of Engineers has reacted.
Yeah, you know, several senators got involved in this. You have the senators from Illinois and Missouri and
15,
Minnesota.
I think.
Yeah, and those especially, you know, who rely on commerce on that 180-mile stretch from St. Louis down to Cairo, Illinois, where the rocks are starting to stick up out of the water and where they've been having to really watch the navigation, and you know, where it was expected to close. Yeah, it's a sticky issue because you've got those folks upstream on the Missouri who rely on you know, that water up there for their drinking water supplies. So.
Well, I heard from one because, you know, in my Samuelson Says, I said we've got to release more of that water, and I did hear from one of our viewers who said, well, Samuelson, wait a minute, you better make sure there's enough water up there before you start taking our water to put into the Mississippi to help those people.
Yeah. You know, it's tricky operating those towboats, even in the best of conditions. You know, we hopped a ride on one of the Mississippi River towboats a few years ago, and that massive tow stretched out for 3 football fields in front of that boat.
I can't imagine how you steer that, because that channel gets fairly narrow.
Oh, it's very narrow and very shallow. They have depth sensors up on the very front of the tow, and the guy's sitting there watching all of the instrumentation up at the pilot house. But you realize, you know, he's sharing it with upbound traffic, and there are all kinds of crooks and turns in the river. And yes, when you consider the depth and the massive amount of tonnage that he's trying to move. I mean, and that points out another concern that the folks defending the locks have often pointed out. What would you do with that tonnage? Where else could you put it? You don't have nearly enough rail cars or motive power on the railroads. Just think of the thousands upon thousands of trucks you would dump out onto the highways, and we already have a trucker shortage, not enough people to operate the trucks, the trucking industry points out.
But the other comment that the viewer made who said, you know, make sure there's water there, he said, we need another railroad. How long is it going to take to build a railroad that goes from the upper Midwest to the Gulf of Mexico? Just isn't going to happen.
Well, in South America, they're trying to build one, of course, and they have built some rail capacity down there, but we just can't forget, you know, as on our show this week was pointed out in our discussion that we had about the markets, how crucial the transportation system is.
Yep. Well, get some Christmas shopping done. I'll do the same.
You meaning buy your present? All right. So long.